Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walking, and here's a question. Why is knowing how or why something works important? Now, depending on who you ask, you might get a different response. You could ask a mechanic and they might say something along the lines of, well, it's important to know how things like cars work so that they can fix them. If you ask a scientist, they might say, well, it's important to know how the universe works so that we can develop things like new technology. You might ask a flat earther and they'll say, well, it's not important at all. Now, in case you haven't caught on already, what I am referring to is a debate that I recently had with a flat earther called Right the Hand, who thought that it was unimportant to ask the question of why something happens.
One, I'm of the camp that you can't tell why a rock falls just from timing it fall, and two, the cause of events are, I could care less why a nail goes through wood when I hammer it because of molecular structure. It doesn't matter. The only thing that will ever matter is that it does happen and how it happens.
So with what he's saying, it sounds like something that only flat earthers would say, because flat earthers don't want to know why something falls, because if they look into why something falls, they would eventually have to arrive at the conclusion that gravity is causing things to fall. However, I don't think that this is entirely unique to flat earthers. If I was working as a checkout chick, for example, I don't need to know why something falls, because it's not important to me. If I just want to, enjoy life and, get paid from my job, knowing why something falls isn't important. But here is the important difference. Checkout chicks don't go around telling everybody that they're wrong on why things happen. Now, whether the question of why is important or not usually boils down to, are you going to use that information? If you're not going to use the information in any way, it's probably not entirely important. You may bring it up in conversation as a fun fact, but you're probably not going to use it much outside of that. However, if you are doing something like science, or if you are debating people on the subject, it's probably a good idea to know why. Now, if you don't care about why things happen, then you shouldn't get involved in debates on why things happen. What you want to argue is more the philosophy of how do we know that the information that we have on why things happen is accurate. And as much as many people watching this video may disagree, that is actually a valid debate to have, because the scientific method, peer review, has its basis in philosophy of how do we know things? At the end of the day, how do I know that everything that I consider to be the truth is correct? It could be that everything that I believe is completely wrong. This is why I often say to flat earthers that there's no such thing as 100% concrete, undeniable proof, because any evidence that I bring up, someone could go ahead and say, well, no, that's wrong because this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. If I were to give evidence that the Earth is a globe because ships disappear over the horizon, a flat earther could literally just say, well, that's magic, and they could actually be right about that. Now, just because someone could be right about something doesn't mean that they are right about something. That's when people need to work out, okay, out of these two competing possibilities, which one is most likely? And that is where something like evidence would come in. If someone has evidence for their position, then their position is far more likely to be correct than a position without evidence. So yes, as out there as it may seem, someone could assert that, well, magic does everything, and I don't need to ask questions because I have this explanation of magic. And they could very well be right that magic does everything, but they likely don't have any evidence that magic does everything. And an important thing to note is that if your explanation has no evidence behind it, it then becomes an assumption and is therefore subject to Occam's razor, which says that the explanation with the least amount of assumptions is most likely the correct explanation. Now, another thing that I want to address is some things may seem self-evident, such as if I drop this, it falls, right? Or does it? So even though when I drop this it appears to fall, other explanations could be given. For example, someone could say that, well, when you drop an object, everything else is just accelerating up at 9.8 meters per second, so it gives the appearance that something is falling, when in actuality, it's not. With enough denialism, you can deny pretty much anything, even if it seems like there's no way that you can deny it. Take, for example, water boiling. water's not actually boiling, there are just little magical bubbles that are appearing which are moving the water to the cloud dimension. Now it could very well be that these descriptions that I've given are actually correct. And if it is indeed the case that water doesn't actually boil and is instead moved to the cloud dimension by little magical bubbles, then you better credit me when that discovery is made for coming up with that explanation. But like what was mentioned earlier, evidence is a key point. If I don't have any evidence for a position like magical bubbles, then that position shouldn't be considered unless I can provide some kind of evidence. And another important thing is that explanations need to be falsifiable. This means that you can go ahead and test whether an explanation is correct by setting up an experiment, having a hypothesis of what should happen, and comparing it to what actually does happen when the experiment is run. Now to me, that would be the most important thing to do when asking the question of why something happens, because if you want to know why something happens, then the best way to do it is by coming up with an explanation and testing that explanation to see if it holds. If an explanation holds after tests, then that explanation is most likely correct, but it could always be wrong. Now this is where I start to bring it back to the question that I asked in the beginning. Why is knowing how or why something happens important? Because someone could argue that because we can never know with 100% certainty why or how something happens, then it is completely irrelevant or unimportant. But the irony of it is that they're most likely making this argument using a microphone, using microprocessors, using fiber optic cables to communicate with people in other countries or even within the same country, using all these concepts that we only have because people decided to figure out the answers to why things happen or to how things happen. Yes, it could be that our understanding of quantum mechanics is completely wrong. It could be that the transistor actually operates in a completely different way to how we thought that the transistor operates. But the fact is, we only figured out that the transistor is possible by using our understanding of quantum mechanics, even if our understanding of quantum mechanics is flawed. So at the end of the day, if right the hand wants to argue that knowing the answer to why something happens is unimportant, then technology is pretty much unimportant because that was built because people figured out the answers to why things happen. Now before I wrap up, I do want to make an extra point because sometimes I would say how instead of why, because how and why are very two similar questions. In fact, any why question that you can get, like why something happens, can be reframed into how is this able to happen? Or if you have an explanation of why something happens, it can also be reframed as how this is being caused to happen or something like that. But anyway, leave a like and subscribe if you liked that video. Leave a comment letting me know what you think. I do very much like making videos based on philosophy because I find philosophy to be quite interesting. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons. TheSunExpress, What Jesus, Fight the Flat Earth, Holmes, Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, Wolfie, Stringer News 1, Ashpanash, Reynolds, Curvy New Yorker, and Syssiphus. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. There will be a link in the description. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching. So, an important thing to remember is that I'm in New Zealand, which means when I drop this, how is it actually falling? I'm upside down.